Loading. Welcome to Access the Animus.
Hello everyone and welcome to a new video here on Access the Animus. Today we're going to try and analyze the story content available through the Mastery Challenge game mode for Assassin's Creed Valhalla and its potential repercussions on future updates and potentially expansions for the game, so spoiler alert in case you haven't tested the game mode yet. In the video we're going to have a look at the new character of Hilderan and how she might be tied to a famous Valkyrie from the Norse mythology and how she interacted with Odin and Freiya during the Isu era. Of course, we're also going to discuss the sanctuary/vault that can be found at the end of the Mastery Challenge story, and the Odin's Eye piece of Eden that is found inside of it. And finally, based on that, we are going to discuss what might happen next, and what this chunk of story might lead to in the next updates. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking it, subscribing to our channel, and turning the notifications on so you don't miss any of our future updates. And with that out of the way, let's dive into our story analysis of the Mastery Challenge game mode for Assassin's Creed Valhalla. For those of you who still might not know, Mastery Challenge is a new and replayable mode which is now available for free for everyone and is basically made up of a series of tests focused on the player's combat, archery and stealth skills, and my best way to describe it is weird? Surprising maybe? It is a very interesting and challenging game mode that can keep players entertained for a while, but at the same time the surprising factor connected to this game mode, which originally seemed to be only gameplay focused, is that there is an actual story connected to it, which we shared in our previous video, and it's not just a random one. It involves Odin, Freiya, the Valkyries and some first civilization technology as well, so really something pretty interesting and somewhat oriented to hardcore story fans that you wouldn't expect from a free update focused on gameplay. On the other side though, it heavily involves magic, and let's say unlikely events that would be fine in a game mode that is focused on gameplay, but don't click very well when you involve proper lore and story. The DLC starts with a meteorite hitting the hill right in front of Ravensthorpe, and yes, meteorite, it's kinda visible, but was Meteor really a name for this free update and not an upcoming DLC? Who knows really. Anyway, the location hit by the meteorite is not a random place, as that is one of the locations where the Odin illusionary runes were and are placed. Now, it's not the exact same location, but it's pretty much right underneath it. Kinda like if the rune was actually indicated that something is there, but we'll get back to this later in the video. Right after that, a hooded character called Hilderan appears where the meteor hit, and she shows that the meteor revealed a door, an entrance to something, and this is where the unlikely events involved in this story start, as it feels pretty convenient that a random meteor specifically hit the mountainside in front of Eivor's settlement, revealing a door that, as we'll see, is tied to Odin, who in turn is obviously tied to Eivor herself. So yeah, pretty unlikely and convenient, at least for now. Hilderan, who is voiced by the same voice actor as Valka from the main game, mentioned that she believes that the door is something that she's been looking for quite some time, calling it Freyja's Gate. Thus, on the allure of finding out what's behind the gate, Eivor allows Hilderan to stay in the settlement and even allows her to build a house and a fighting/training ground, along with a shrine to Freiya, already hinting at the fact that this is something that is going to last beyond the Mastery Challenge quest itself. The old lady says multiple times that Eivor will want to see what's behind the door, somehow hinting at the fact that she might know that Eivor is bearing Odin's blood, which is exactly the same thing that happened with Deirdre in the Wrath of the Druids DLC. Eventually, Hilderan asks Eivor to fight her for Freiya, and of course she proves that she's no mere old lady, but when eventually Eivor prevails, Hilderan shows an amulet that seems to interact with the Freiya shrine that she built, and a red light appears on them, which as we'll see symbolizes combat. This is where Hilderan takes Eivor to Hildrheim, which looks like some sort of magical world at first, and to be clear, is not a representation of one of the realms of the Norse mythology. In fact, as stated by former narrative director Darby McDevitt in an interview with consultant and Old Norse expert Jackson Crawford, Hugr is the word that the writers for the game leveraged to indicate spirit and soul for the Vikings in the game. So Hugrheim here appears to mean the realm of the spirit or the realm of the mind, basically hinting at the fact that all of this is happening in Eivor's and Hilderan's minds after seemingly being triggered by the amulet and the shrine itself. So Eivor gets to find Hilderan in this new dimension, which mind you seems to just appear as a layer placed on the actual environment, like a sort of augmented reality, again hinting at how this is not actually happening. In the boss fight, Hilderan is actually called Hildr, which as we mentioned in our previous videos, is the name of a Valkyrie from the Norse mythology, who had the power to revive the dead in battlefields. Keep this in mind as it will be useful later on in the video. After defeating Hildr too, the amulet glows red once again and Eivor gets back to the real world. Hilderan does say that what happened wasn't magic, but something called battle meditation, and finally drops the name Hugrheim, basically confirming that all of this happened in Eivor's mind and that it was a secret form of training, kind of like the Room of Spirit and Time from the Dragon Ball series, where the user can practice and attack with no fear of hurting themselves. Again, this looks like a lot of magical stuff, but keep in mind that Hugrheim, this battle meditation technique, is activated by the so-called amulet, which, spoiler alert, is also what will be needed to open the door to a sort of first civilization vault or sanctuary, so the amulet itself is likely to be some kind of first civilization tech as well, which would slightly justify within the AC lore how all of this is happening. But even when it seems like there is a semblance of a justification, there are still elements that venture too much on the magic side, like the amulet working as a vessel that has to be filled with the energy created in battle, which again is happening in the user's mind, so that doesn't really make a lot of sense. Also, Hilderan says that the amulet only works with the Freiya shrines that, in her words, can be found all over Mercia, but are actually scattered across all the England map, which seems too big of a mistake to slip through the cracks, and makes it seem like the audio for this quest was recorded when the game mod was designed to be slightly different. In this case, maybe it was planned to only take place in Mercia, and then in another dialogue, Hilderan also mentioned that she has equipment in her store, which is not the case, at least for now. Before starting her training, Eivor notices that something about Hilderan reminds her of Valka, which at first sight I'd say it's the voice and accent, which is exactly the same, but here is possibly to say that some other traits are reminding Eivor of her, for reasons that are currently unknown. So Eivor embarks on her journey and finds the various shrines. She fills the amulet with energy, and during the various times when she returns to Hilderan, the old lady hints at the fact that she already knows what lies beyond Freiya's gate. Eventually, Eivor finishes her training and goes back to Hilderan, who, again quite conveniently, has removed all the rubble in front of the gate in the meantime. So finally Eivor can see the entryway, and it's a standard stone featuring the same symbol and runes placed on the amulet and the shrines. In itself, this entryway is weird because it is supposed to be a first civilization building located in front of Ravensthorpe, but the entrance is made up of normal stone instead of the classic obsidian-like material. At the same time though, the door is not a normal door either, because it opens up once Eivor brings the amulet close to it. Before that though, when discussing the door being so close to Ravensthorpe, Hilderan states something pretty interesting, that is that there are no coincidences when the gods are involved, and that everything happens for a reason, very much hinting at the fact that this first Civ vault was seemingly built there knowing that Eivor, Odin's reincarnation, would have settled very close to that location. Finally, Hilderan states that Freiya built the door so that only someone with the strength and the will of Odin could open it, and reading through the lines, it is presumed to mean that the Isur Freyja built the vault and the door so that only someone with Odin's blood and DNA, and of course the amulet, could actually open it. So Eivor happens to match the description properly, and thus is able to open the door. Now, notice that Hilderan did not even try to open it, it was Eivor who had to do it. When the two women venture beyond the door, they end up in a room that seems to have been carved under the rocks and still has standard stone architecture, not Isu one. Of course, what stands out are three alcoves, one made of ice, one made up of root and wood, and one made up of fire and lava. At the center of the chamber, though, is placed a pedestal with a sort of a spherical object placed over it. Like a proper golem in front of the ring, Hilderan conjures a sinister glance and is very much interested in the golden shiny object. But differently from Gollum, she orders Eivor to take hold of the orb, once again showing that somehow she cannot take it and cannot activate it, while Eivor, and especially her portion of Odin DNA, actually can. So Eivor gets close to the sphere, which is not an apple of Eden by the way, and this seems to activate it with a lot of first civilization symbols flying around only when Eivor gets close to it. The orb then levitates, as Eivor is covering herself with the amulet, which also seems to be activated, as similar to the orb, a white glow surrounds it. The moment the amulet gets activated is the moment the orb slows down and deactivates itself. Eivor gets a proper look at the now obvious piece of Eden, which seems to have a glass element at its top, and then takes it, and right after that, in the most cartoonishly evil of behaviors, Hilderan orders Eivor to give the sphere to her. I mean, at least she didn't go muhahaha, so that's a plus, I guess. As Eivor is finally starting to understand that she was used, as it happened in a lot of plot lines in the main game and the Wrath of the Druids DLC, Hilderan finally gives a name and a function to the piece of Eden, which is called Odin's Eye, and will allow them to find what Hilderan describes as their next location in their quest to find the so-called, and not better specified, Odin's Vault. So yeah, it's called Odin's Eye, but it's not the Isu equivalent of the eye that Odin sacrificed in the mythological narrative shown in the Jotunheim arc, as we saw in the first civilization cutscenes of the game that Odin had lost his actual eye and he had also been called One-Eyed Wretch. The mention of going to the next location is pretty interesting, as it already shows that the story doesn't end here and that Odin's Eye will show Eivor and Hilderan where to go, kinda like the Dragon Radar from the Dragon Ball manga series. Now, I don't know if the devs here were very much fans of Dragon Ball or if I'm just seeing things. It's probably the latter though. Anyway, the interesting element here is that if this sanctuary located underneath an Odin illusionary rune is the actual start of a quest involving more locations and aimed at finding an Odin's vault, then it's so very likely that the next steps will involve new locations connected to the other Odin runes locations spotted by fans in the last few months, and thus that we are going to finally know what this mystery was all about, but more on that later. Eventually, Eivor realizes she's being used, and Hilderan basically says, yes, but you got more skill points and you can get weapons at my store, so... And Eivor is like, okay, which is not really what you like to see from a main character realizing that being used by a villain-like character, but what do I know? So that's basically it for the story, but interestingly enough, there are actually 4 documents available to read in this presumed first civilization sanctuary. The first one is in front of the lava alcove and reads, "Master of Hugerheim served her warlord faithfully until the day she chose to turn from his instruction and abandon her duty." This is likely to be a reference to Hilderan, who is the lady that actually taught Eivor about Hugerheim, but this is a document presumably dating to the First Civilization times, as it's found in the sanctuary and over a First Civilization kind of stone, so it's more likely a reference to a past version of Hilderan, maybe the actual character of Hildr, the Valkyrie from the Norse mythology that we mentioned earlier. So Hilderan or Hildr served her warlord, whose identity we'll get to know later, until one day she chose to abandon her position. The second document can be found in front of the Wood and Roots alcove and reads, "The seer Voluspa tells Odin of their coming. 6 names pass her lips. From far away they ride to Valhalla, ready to accept their sacred duty." In this case, the document very much plunges in the Norse mythology and especially in the Valkyries' lore. In fact, in stanza 30 of the poem Voluspa, a seeress who is not actually called Voluspa as mentioned in the document if I'm not mistaken, tells Odin that she saw Valkyries coming from far away who are ready to ride to the realm of the gods. In that passage, the seeress mentions a list of 6 names of said Valkyries: Skald, Skogul, Gunnar, Gundul, Gerskogul, and Hildr. So we got another direction to Hilderan's story during the First Civilization era. Interestingly enough, in the Voluspa, the seeress refers to the Valkyries as the ladies of the warlord, in other words, the ladies of Odin. So from that we can infer that the warlord mentioned in the previous document was Odin himself. The third document, located in front of the ice alcove, reads, "Warriors fight to impress, only half can go. Odin's mead hall awaits the Einherjar, Freyja's fields take the rest." Now this too is a reference to the Valkyries' lore from the Norse mythology. In fact, as mentioned by Wikipedia, in the Norse mythology, Valkyries were female figures who chose those who may die in battle and those who may live. They actually selected only half of those who died in battle to take them to Valhalla, the hall of the slain ruled over by Odin, where they would become the Einherjar, which is Old Norse for single or once fighters. The other half would go to the goddess Freyja's afterlife fields, which is exactly what is mentioned in the document. So in this case, we are probably just in front of another document that is basically saying, wink wink, Valkyries, okay? The final document is the one that sort of ties them all together and is actually found at the entrance of the sanctuary. It spells, "Stripped of her armor, she was made mortal. Banished to wander Midgard, her purpose removed. Only Odin can see where her armor lays, a secret shared only with Freyja." Again, considering the previous documents, this too is very likely to be about the Valkyrie Hildr during the Isu era. So trying to piece everything together, if there really was any meaning or attempt to have this story be part of the First Civilization narrative, during the Isu era 6 female warriors came from a different territory than the Asgardian one and started working for Odin, and these Isu ladies of course later came to be known in the myths and legends as the Valkyries. One of them was called Hildr, and was also named Master of Hugerheim, meaning that maybe she was the one that even created this sort of training of the mind via the First Civilization disc that we have seen throughout the quest as the Amulet. At some point though, Hildr decided not to serve Odin anymore and abandoned her duty. Once Odin found out about that, he stripped her of her Valkyrie armor. She was made mortal and was banished to wander Midgard, that is the earth. Now this may mean that Odin punished Hildr by somehow using a version of the seventh method that had her reborn as a human, hence why she was made mortal, and that is why we can see her as an old woman who knows about Isu artifacts and the like in the 9th century AD. The last sentence of the document states that only Odin can see where her, as in Hildr's armor, lays, a secret shared only with Freiya, and this is probably a reference to how the Odin's Eye piece of Eden can lead to the so-called Odin's Vault, the implication being that Odin stripped Hildr of her armor and hid it in a location that only he and Freiya knew about, and that for whatever reason he saved that location in the Odin's Eye piece of Eden. That is why Hilderan is so interested in studying the Odin's Eye and finally getting to her armor from the Isu era, which maybe is the one we already saw in the tutorial mission, in some sort of revenge against Odin. Or maybe we're overthinking all of this, but right at the start of this quest, when Eivor states that the meteorite hit the earth like it was thrown by Odin himself, Hilderan says that that is the strength that he no doubt wishes he possessed, proving some kind of direct knowledge he had of Odin himself and some grudge that she was holding towards him. So after all of this, considering that we have some unfinished business here, the major question is, what happens next? What can we hope to see based on what we have? Joraptor, for example, has hypothesized that the alcoves could act as portals, with the one on the right potentially leading to the Muspelheim map of the upcoming DLC likely centered around it, with the other alcoves leading to more maps representing additional Norse realms, while I believe the three alcoves are more of a representation of the three settings for the combat, stealth, and archery mastery challenges. Another idea is that the whole quest that should take Eivor to the so-called Odin's Vault might eventually be a plot lead to the Muspelheim DLC, as it heavily involves Odin and Freiya. What I currently believe is that this is a side story of its own and that through it we will have the answer to the mystery of the Odin's illusionary runes, which will never live up to the fans' expectations because of how much we self-hyped about it. More specifically, the current info at our disposal shows that Eivor might be used once again by Hilderan in order for her to acquire her old armor, which likely will lead to another boss battle and eventually Eivor will obtain this armor for herself. Interestingly enough, the currently known locations of the Odin illusionary runes are 6, as recently shown by Andy Reloads, and considering we already found the first, that leaves us with 5, which is the exact number of pieces of equipment that makes an equipment set. Coincidence? Oh well, I honestly don't know at this point. So yes, in my personal opinion, this will be a side story of its own that will lead to a new equipment set and maybe will explain that Valka random name drop, while not necessarily also leading into the Muspelheim DLC. And if it does, in a justified way, then all for the better. And that was it for today's video. Do you agree with our interpretation of the story connected to the Mastery Challenge game mode? How do you think the story will be continued and when? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching and we'll see you in our next video.